Hello everyone, my name is Laura, this is my channel, Laura's Little Library, and welcome to today's video, which are the best books that I read in 2024. I read so many good books this year. It is kind of crazy and insane. So I went through and I looked at all of my 5-star reads this year, of which there were quite a few. There were at least like 15 or so of them. I'm not gonna go through all of them specifically too much. I'm only gonna do the top 10 reads of this year, otherwise this video could take forever and I didn't want to do that. So I'm gonna go through the top 10 books that I read this year. I will have some honorable mentions also at the end. As I was trying to rank the books between best book of the year and then second best, third best, like actually giving them a ranking, I just had such a hard time doing that. I could not figure out which book to put above another. So the reality is that other than my best book of the year, just to have a best book of the year for sake of my stats and my sanity, all these other books aren't actually really in a specific slot. They are all just mumbo jumbo in the top 10 best books of this year. So they're not in any particular order. So let's go ahead and get started with them. First up, I have Fence, which is a graphic novel. This one touched my heart, let me tell you, because I am a fencer, and you know, fencing is not a sport that I see represented all the time. I mean, I see a lot of sword fighting and a lot of training, but nothing like the sport of fencing, with the fencing rules and weapons and materials, equipment. You know, all the other fantasy is always sword fighting, like for your life, rather than the sport. And so I started reading this graphic novel and I absolutely fell in love. I thought the characters are so fun and adorable, and the premise, it just captured my heart. You know, I'm so excited to see something that I enjoy in a graphic novel and done well. So this definitely had to make my top 10. I also have volumes 2, 3, and 4 on my TBR, and I will be getting to those by the end of the year for sure. So the second book on this list is actually a sequel, which is a huge surprise for me because I don't typically enjoy sequels as much as the first book. Like, I'm one of those people where the first book in a series or whatever is almost always my favorite, just because it's the most amount of world building and exploration and learning how things work. But the second book in this duology, so it is a duology, just blew me away. I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and that is This Cursed Light by Emily Thied. I don't know, because like I loved the first book, and then it had a really good cliffhanger actually. I didn't think it was going to be a duology, and then I read that cliffhanger and I was like, oh, this is definitely a duology. And then reading this, it continued the plot in a new and fresh way, so it didn't feel stale. There was so much more to explore and to learn about the characters, and the romance, of course, was great. And I was just really shocked at how much I truly enjoyed this book as a sequel. Not even just as a sequel, but as its own book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And so it definitely had to make my top 10 because of that. Next up, we actually have a prequel, and I cannot believe it took me this long to read this book, but also this long to purchase this book, and that is Her Radiant Curse by Elizabeth Lim. So this is the prequel to the Six Crimson Cranes duology. So this actually follows kind of our villain from the duology, and we get her backstory, why she is the way she is. So if you haven't read Six Crimson Cranes or A Dragon's Promise, then I won't spoil it too much. I will just say that I am a huge fan of Elizabeth Lim's writing and her storytelling and her use of mythology to inform both her characters and her plots. So of course this was no exception, and it definitely had to make the top 10 for the writing style, the adventure, the journey it took me on emotionally, and I have to have the UK covers, which is why it took me so long to get this book. Now, moving on, I've got a couple of kind of more thrillery books on this list, which is really great because I do like reading thriller. I just don't read it as much as fantasy or contemporary, but I'm really happy that I have a couple of thrillers on this list. So the first one I've talked about quite a bit this year in my videos, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but that is That's Not My Name by Megan Lally, and this was a thriller that I don't particularly know why exactly it captured me so much. You're following this girl who wakes up, doesn't remember who she is, where she is, she's lost everything. And so she is found by a police officer, and then somebody comes and is like, I'm your father, oh my goodness, I've been looking for you, blah blah blah. But then at the same time, we are following another POV of the boy who is dating a girl who disappeared. And everybody, you know, thinks it was him, that he killed her or that he still has her. And it's been quite a while, and he is just so heartbroken, and he didn't do anything, and so he goes and tries to figure out what happened to her. And it sounds like kind of a very basic thriller premise. Like, it was interesting to me, and I was intrigued, but it was the writing that kept me hooked. Like, I could not put this down for the life of me. I listened to it over audio, and I can remember just going on walks or wanting to drive around just so that I could listen to this book more and not be disturbed, because I needed to finish this book. And there aren't too many books that do that to me, especially thrillers. So it was quite pleasant to read because of that. Yeah, next one that I have is All That Consumes Us. This was a huge contender for favorite book of the year. I'm also kind of surprised that it's not my favorite book of the year, but it's because I read this quite a bit earlier in the year. And this is a dark academia thriller. You are following a bunch of like art students, mostly like writers and poets and things like that. And they do some shifty things in the little artist house that they live in order to expand their craft and get better at their craft. So it was a very good like dark academia thriller, and this honestly probably should be my favorite book of the year, but we're just gonna keep going with this list. Another sequel, surprisingly enough, is actually The Darkness Within Us by Trisha Levenseller. Of course, I'm a huge fan of Trisha Levenseller. She is one of my favorite authors. I have been awaiting this book for so long, and it did not disappoint. This is the second book, and the first one is The Shadows Between Us, and this follows, it's like the second book in the duology, but it follows another character, so it's kind of a separate story that just takes place after. But again, you know, the fantasy romance, it's romantasy, and I have been getting so much into romantasy this year, and I absolutely adore it, so of course it would capture my heart because of that. Also, look at these braid edges. Ah! It's a short but sweet, like, just crunches you so well. Then I also have The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. I read this in the autumn, and this book was really what captured me was the atmosphere. I thought the plot was a little slow, but I did really like the characters a lot, and it was just the atmosphere of the writing, the appreciation for nature and magic and its relationship, how they're intertwined. It was very much like Rachel Griffin's writing, and I love her books as well. Hi, Gatita. And so this one just blew me away. It was so beautiful to read, and it was just, it transported me to a different place, which, so definitely pick this one up. It was a top 10. Getting close to the end of this top 10 list, we have A Fragile Enchantment, and this is by Alison Saft. This one captures me much more because of like the plot and intention behind it. It is a romance kind of fantasy, but there were just so many very clear, very obvious, like this is based on the relationship between England and Ireland in terms of colonization and looking down on one country over another and independence and things like that, but all bundled up in like a really good romantasy. And so that has a special place in my heart because of my own personal passions. So of course, how could I not? And there were just so many like well-written things that the characters say in this book that I was just, it hit me so good. And so of course I had to include this in my top 10. Please definitely read it if you have not. This next one was a bit of a surprise, both that I liked it so much and that it made this list, because when I saw it in the store, I kind of picked it up mostly because of cover, and I was like, oh, I'll probably like enjoy it, you know, 3, maybe 4-star read, but it's just a really pretty book. And then I ended up loving it, and that is The Scarlet Alchemist, and this is by Kylie Lee Baker. I mean, come on, look, it's beautiful. It's got the sprayed edges. Like, I needed to have this book one way or another because I found this at Thrift Books, so it was quite a steal. And I was like, you know, I have it, so I should probably definitely read it. And then I read it, and I was so invested in our characters, in the plot. You've got this girl who is studying to be an alchemist, but she, you know, it's in ancient China and in this very specific dynasty, and she is obviously looked down upon because, you know, women can't be alchemists and things like that. And so she goes through the trials, and then she goes from there, and oh my goodness, like just the way that alchemy is done, but then also the way that it's described was just, oh, just so beautiful. I'm sorry, I can't even talk about this one just because it was so good, and you all should read it. Yeah, that's really all I'm gonna say. The final book, which was now my top book of the year. It's also one of my most recent reads, which is probably why it's my top book of the year, because I'm still thinking about it all the time. And that book is Wisteria by Adeline Grace. So this is the third and final book in the Belladonna trilogy. And again, let me tell you, so surprised at how much I loved this book, as it's not the first book in the trilogy. It's not even the second book. It's funny because I actually had the second book on my list of like top 10 favorites, like talk about this at the end of the year, and then I read this book and I was like, oh my word, I don't even remember how good the second book was, because this one just blew me away. It is romantasy in every sense of the word. You've got your marriage of convenience, enemies to lovers, like everybody's trying to figure everything out, but the reality is that Fate and Signa's cousin from the first book is married to Fate, and they hate each other, and it is so incredibly good. If you've read Belladonna, please keep going with the series. This is so worth it. If you are just one of those people that love like your enemies to lovers, like all you want is something that is trope, but with a good plot and with a nice magic system, but like the romantasy is what you're reading for, this is what it is. It's got it in spades. It's perfect. It's amazing. Those were my top 10 books of the year. I do have a few honorable mentions, so I'm just gonna very quickly mention The Good, the Bad, and the Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto, Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I know these books didn't come out in 2024. They're just books that I read in 2024 and loved. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. Of course, how can I not mention this? Throne of the Fallen by Carrie Maniscalco. Of course. Finally, and again kind of surprisingly, The Brothers Hawthorne by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So those are all the books that I read and absolutely adored this year. Like I said, it was a really good reading year, so I had lots of good books, so this list was incredibly hard to do, which is why I had so many honorable mentions. Thank you all very much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to check the description below, as I have other bookish social media that you can follow me on. And if you like bookish content like this, be sure to hit the subscribe and hit the bell to be notified. I am posting many more videos now that I am on break, and it's the end of the year. I've got lots of fun content planned, so definitely hit subscribe. Again, thank you all so very much, and until I see you in the next video, happy reading!